what is density? In physics, you might remember that density is mass divided by volume. But that's not quite the sense in which we've been using the term density or densities. We've been using it to refer to stages of spiritual evolution: first density, second density, third density, fourth density. And it's kind of odd language. But that exact formula, mass divided by volume, when you apply it in the correct way, can actually be the key to understanding that spiritual evolution. Ross says, spiritual mass, so to speak, is that which begins to attract the outmoving and ongoing vibratory oscillations of beingness into the gravity, speaking in a spiritual sense, of a great central sun. So it's that which unites, that which brings the energies of the universe back to the center, or the core or creator of the infinite universes. So it is that which brings you back to the creator. It's teleology. It is the end and purpose of the created world. And in the same way we quantify physical systems in terms of mass, how much force they attract from neighboring objects, we can quantify spiritual systems in terms of teleology, in terms of the end and purpose of the creator. And the structure of reality is in such a way that we can participate in the organic evolution of the universe. So as you get more spiritual mass, you become more identified with that central sun, with that original logos that is the design, will, and wisdom of the universe. So because they are in accordance with the end or purpose of reality, reality then reinforces itself through that spiritual mass, because it's trying to create positive experience for its secondary images. And the way to do that is, the most positive experience for a secondary image is salvation, is the retraction of their fundamental identity into the God, into the global operator descriptor, and therefore into the identity of reality. When they exist in the same way that reality exists through, they are eternal. So reality tries to take everyone's needs into account. So teleology is all about doing that as well. This is the famous maxim, love your neighbor as yourself. And the reason why you have to do that is because every single other person in the world is a co-image of you. We are all made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore we have duties to one another, because you are basically reinforcing or denying the identity of reality through all of your actions. When you are hateful, you are destroying a world. But when you are loving, you are taking into account that fundamental, compassionate, and communal nature of reality, and then using that to further the spiritual evolution of the universe and increase the spiritual mass of the universe. So when there's more spiritual mass, then you have a greater density. So this is, you move from very basic things in first density, which is like, bacteria, fire, earth, wind, water, these basic elements. And then second density, you move to like very basic biological organisms. Third density, you get to, human beings as they are currently, but we're now in the transition to fourth density. And fourth density is where things start to get really interesting, because this is the density of universal love. It's when humans become a service to others' planet and also take into account others' experiences and try to satisfy one another. So we're moving in the spiritual evolution through consciousness transition from third density, which is all about self-consciousness, to fourth density, which is about love. We start with this very base physical material, the literal elements that comprise the world, but then we end up with sort of a theic identity, whereby once we get to fifth, sixth, and seventh density, the densities of wisdom, love, or the densities of wisdom, intelligent infinity, and the gateway density back to the creator, you end up with a sort of theic identity for created humans, whereby they are united back to the creator at the terminus of their spiritual evolution. So what is teleological is that which is spiritually massive. It is that which brings things together, which unites the many back to the one. For us, human mind, body, spirit complexes on Earth, it's about trying to intelligently unite behind love and understanding so that we can transcend our struggles as a planet, pass through the great filter, make this the best of all possible worlds for all creatures, and achieve mankind's destiny. where this is quantized in terms of teleological points, or spiritual mass, so to speak. Each progression away from our brutish animal nature, from that third density existence, towards the intrinsic natural law that governs and underlies the world, this is fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh density, increases our spiritual mass towards the central sun, when the many are united back to the one, and we recognize that we are all the expression of one fundamental identity. That is what love is. That is what wisdom is understanding that basic truth. And eventually, all is reconciled back to intelligent infinity, or the creator of the infinite universes, herein spoken of. Ra says, you may conveniently consider each density of being to have a greater and greater spiritual mass. So as you move up, you become a greater expression of the end and purpose and will and wisdom of God. The mass increases, shall we say, significantly, but not greatly, until the gateway density. So that's seventh density. In this density, the summing up, the looking backwards, in short, all the useful functions of polarity have been used. Therefore, the metaphysical electrical nature of the individual goes greater and greater in spiritual mass. So yes, as you make marginal improvements towards the spiritual mass of the universe, but you're never really actually reconciled back to the central sun, the original logos of the universe, until you get very, very close to God. And when you're further away, when you're still on the edges, when you're teetering on fourth density, you have a planetary civilization, you're doing very well in the eyes of God, but there's still a very sharp distinction between creator and created. But as you approach seventh density, you get exponentially closer to that final point where you're trying to reach it, but not much before that. Even in fifth, sixth density, you're still very, very far away, because it's exponentially close. This can be understood through Albert Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared, where we approach the maximum speed of light as the mass of an object tends towards infinity, but it doesn't really get super close until you get very, very, very fast. Until you get very close to the speed of light, your mass doesn't increase substantially. In the same way, as we approach the maximum spiritual evolution, our spiritual mass tends towards infinity, but it's not until you get very, very close to the maximum speed, to the maximum density, that you actually start to see these enormous gains in spiritual mass. Ra says, for an analog, one may observe the work of the one known as Albert Einstein, who posits the growing to infinity of mass as this mass approaches the spiritual speed of light. So the seventh density being is like an object that's traveling very close to the speed of light and gets very, very close to infinite mass as it approaches it. But it's an asymptote, so it never actually reaches it, but it does get very, very close, and as it does, its mass increases exponentially. So the seventh density being, the completed being, the creator who knows itself. So this is essentially a creature who knows itself as the creator, accumulates mass and compacts into the one creator once again. So it's a gateway density, is that once you pass a certain threshold, the creator-created distinction dissolves, and you are now the full expression of God in creation. So eighth density, the density beyond the seventh density scale, which we've spoken in the series, is the end of the seventh density singularity, the end of the gateway or quickening or asymptote, akin to velocities near the speed of light. The contents of the universe, through something called conspansive duality in the CTMU, which we'll cover in its own series, are actually becoming smaller as they're substituted within the image of their previous states. Much like Arthur Eddington's satirical idea, admittedly, the shrinking atom as a dual to the expanding universe. Therefore, the eighth density is ever-increasing spiritual mass distributed over ever-decreasing volume. High mass divided by low volume. What is the limit as the mass approaches infinity and the volume approaches zero? Come on, I know you paid attention in physics class. We're getting to the highest possible density, but to the lowest possible space. So you get this spiritual mass that becomes more and more potent throughout the creation. The highest possible density. The vocabulary all clicks together. Sixth density is the density of light, because as you approach light speed, you get to a singularity point. You get to this point of infinity, and then that's in seventh density, the gateway density. So then, as the questioner asks, the revealing principle of knowledge and law is this upward striving for the creation to be united back to the creator, and all biological and cognitive evolution across the universe can be understood as the manifestation of this fundamental dynamic. Ross says, this is the simple principle of the constant or creator and the transient or incarnate being, and the yearning existing between the two, one for the other, in love and light amidst the distortions of free will, acting upon the illusion-bound entity. So, this is something we've talked about a lot, is that the one creator locally projects itself into images of itself with free will so that it can essentially confuse itself for the sake of a deeper understanding. The one becomes many for the joy of becoming one again, and thus the ultimate purpose of all life and consciousness in the universe is for that final coalescence into the one, into God. So basically, all of life is for the purpose of increasing spiritual mass. It's teleological. It's not random, as you might understand from science. But everything in the universe, especially life, especially conscious beings, is the expression of the one original thought, which distorts itself to create all densities of conscious experience for the logical and experiential self-identification of the one infinite creator. So as this spiritual evolution is happening, there is a telon, there is a spiritual intent such that we are attracted to the next density. There's a little bit of a blurring if you imagine third density as yellow and fourth density is green. We're kind of in an in-between spot of like this like yellowish green, and there's a strong intention such that we move forward in our planetary evolution, and that is now being artificially halted by a technological and financial tyranny that we find ourselves in, but it's nevertheless there. And that is our rightful human destiny, is that we are attracted to the next density, which is already pulling us forward in our spiritual evolution. So we're kind of already in like the neon armor shirt, like yellowish green phase in between third and fourth density. We have the identity of who we are and the collective ego, and parasitic divergence now, of which I've spoken, which is keeping us in the yellow, but we also have the identity of who we could be. We have the CTMU, we have an understanding of who we are and what our role in reality is, and we could be intelligently organized around love and understanding. It's not a logistical problem now, it's simply a problem of collective will. So the third density climate of planetary consciousness is retarding the process whereby we will pass through into fourth density work. At this particular nexus says we will probably pass into fourth density in the next 100 to 700 years, but that can't be exactly accurate because even Ra is very intelligent and can see a lot of things that we can't. It still says it cannot be accurate due to the volatility of your peoples at this space-time. So it could be sooner, it could be even longer than 700 years. But the point is that our spiritual evolution towards higher spiritual density is not random or determined, but is a function of teleology. It's up to us actually to decide whether we want to make it a service to self or a service to others' planet, essentially whether we want a technological singularity wherein we have all power and control nested in the hands of a parasitic elite, or a human singularity whereby responsibility for human destiny is distributed along the lines of merit and responsibility, and we can fulfill our rightful human destiny and pass through the great filter. This is true not only of humanity's transition to a fourth density social memory complex, but also biological evolution, is that there is a teleology, there's a spirit. The goal of life is the increase of spiritual mass. So Charles Darwin got basic facts about natural selection, this self-replication and self-selection feature, but he couldn't, and now physical science still can't, grasp what drives these changes. This is the goal for the universe, to have a bright, vivid, and rich experience of itself for itself, and increase its own spiritual mass. So Ra says the mechanism is one of the attraction of upward spiraling light, the mechanism that is of biological evolution. And there's nothing random about this or any portion of evolution. Evolution is teleological, it is towards an end and a purpose of the ever-ascending densities. This is why first density things, these basic elements, become simple life, and then those have this faculty of self-organization and consciousness. This isn't random. It doesn't just progress that way because that is how organisms naturally adapt to their environment, because nature itself is fine-tuned such that it creates these organisms. So evolution obviously is teleological, and its reproductive urge, let's say, this natural selection and reproduction, is towards the end of ever ascending densities. This primordial instinct, the love and unity of the universe, is that which drives first and second densities as they manifest into the emergence and self-organization of biological life. What Darwin misses is that we live in the display of a teleological reality self-simulation. Therefore, not only are creatures physically changing, but they have non-terminal changes in what we call the spirit or programming world, from which their physical mutations arise over time. So there is already changes to a species being made as the species lives before it's ever mutated. And that means that against Darwinism, that the chemical vehicle is that which most conveniently houses the consciousness. Ross says that the functioning of consciousness, the density of evolution, is the item of interest rather than the chemical makeup of a physical vehicle. So, yes, our body houses our mind, but our mind is actually more fundamental even than our own physical body. We've observed that those whom you call scientists have puzzled over the various differences and possible interrelationships of various stages, types, and conditions of life forms. This is not fruitful material, as it is that which is of a moment's choice by your sublogos. And like that, in 3 sentences, Ra destroys the entire field of academic biology. Is that you're simply observing the relationships among different life forms, then you're not actually understanding what is driving the changes and variations in those, and what is the original purpose of life. They're not at the right level of analysis. And the main point is that physical form, however interesting, is emergent from the metaphysical function and pattern of an entity at the cellular and animal levels. So physical form is not necessary to understand biology, but you actually have to understand these deeper changes, and this is why you have to redirect your thought processes, and this is talking directly to scientists from any mechanical view of evolution. Ross says the will of the Logos posits the potentials available to the evolving entity. The will of the entity as it evolves is the single measure of the rate and fastidiousness of the activation and balancing of the various energy centers. So what is ultimately the purpose of reality? It is for the Logos, the metaphysical identity of reality, to self-differentiate such that it can express itself through the process of cosmic evolution. So it becomes many, it becomes confused, such that it can play this game of increasing its spiritual mass and its own self-attributed utility, and therefore be of value to itself. It be that through which it exists for itself. So the universe is the way that the infinite expresses itself in the world for the purposes of its logical and experiential self-identification through the observer participation of all densities of consciousness. Ra confirms, from the Logos comes all frequencies of radiation of light. These frequencies of radiation make up all the densities of experience that are created by the Logos. I am assuming that the planetary system of our sun in all of its densities is the total of the experience created by our sun as a Logos. So basically Ra says that this octave density of which we have spoken is both omega and alpha, and everything within existence fits within this 1 to 8 octave scale, and the spiritual mass of the infinite universe becoming one central sun or creator once again once you pass that gateway density and all is reconciled back to God. And then is born a new universe, a new infinity, a new Logos, which incorporates all that the Creator has experienced of itself. So the Creator knows itself, as itself, for itself, and then goes into the next octave. And it's a new scale of notes. It's a little different key, but there's a lot of resonance between that and the previous octave. So we know very little about the boundary of the octave, because you can't have this interrelationship, because that is literally outside of the bound of logical inquiry. You can't know about something which is, it's like saying, what's a letter that's not between A and Z? You just can't do it, because that is the order of things as it is established. But in the new active, there are also those who wander. We know very little across the boundary of the octave, except that these beings come to aid our octave in its logos completion. So there's already a strong intention from eighth density, from the self-knowledge of God, in order to help us fulfill our spiritual evolution and increase our spiritual density. So there is the one infinite creator is locally confusing itself through projections or secondary images of itself as cognitively bound observer participants in reality, and then the intention, the possibility coming technically from the future of a fulfilled and completed universe is driving, and in some cases literal entities are driving the spiritual evolution of mankind. So this creates this self-simulation whereby the true nature of reality is concealed. We can't see it directly with our eyes. We see this finite existence by a multi-layered veil of illusion, wherein we only see the display domain, the physical world, instead of its source and essence in infinity. The Logos creates the self-simulation with these various degrees or densities of distortions. Ra says, if you'll penetrate the nature of the first distortion, the distortion of confusion that allows for freedom, in its application of self-knowing self, you may begin to distinguish the hallmark of an infinite creator, variety. Were there no potentials for misunderstanding and therefore understanding, there would be no experience, because you have to go on this journey from first to eighth density and have this experience, have this misunderstanding, in order such that the one, the infinite, can have a deeper self-knowledge. By transcending the confusion and knowing that everything and everyone else is the expression of the same identity as you, and yet beautiful, holy, and pure, precisely in its uniqueness, you see why the Creator created creation. Variety. It's more interesting than existing as pure ontic potential and just existing as the self. Is God wants to give himself in gift to the other and have that gift returned to him. And that is the ultimate teleology, the end and purpose of reality. As Alan Watts, one of the great spiritual teachers of the 20th century, says, God likes to play hide and seek, but because there is nothing outside of God, he has no one but himself to play with. But he gets over this difficulty by pretending that he is not himself. This is his way of hiding from himself. He pretends that he is you and I and all the people in the world, all the animals, plants, all the rocks, and all the stars. In this way, he has strange and wonderful adventures, some of which are terrible and frightening. But these are just like bad dreams, for when he wakes up, they will disappear. When the game has gone on long enough, all of us will wake up, stop pretending, and remember that we are all one single self, the God who is all that there is and who lives forever and ever. He says, it's the same as when we play cards. At the beginning of the game, we shuffle them all into a mess, which is like the bad things in the world. There's this disorder, this variety expressing itself as chaos at the very beginning of things. But the point of the game is to put the mess into good order, and the one who does it best is the winner. So that's teleology, is organizing that chaos into habitable order. Then we shuffle the cards and play again, and so it goes with the world. And once we've gotten this order, once we've restored the cards to their original state and united them back with the shuffler, then we shuffle the cards and you play again. And that's just how the world works. Ra takes this analogy yet further with the profound parable of the poker game, about how non-terminal entities enter the illusion of separateness for the greater self-knowledge of Creator. I'll read it in full because it's important. I am Ra. Let us give the example of the man who sees all the poker hands. He then knows the game. It is but child's play to gamble, for it is no risk. The other hands are known. The possibilities are known, and the hand will be played correctly, but with no interest. In time, space, and in the true color green density, the hands of all are open to the eye. The thoughts, the feelings, the troubles, all these may be seen. There is no deception and no desire for deception. Thus much may be accomplished in harmony, but the mind-body-spirit gains little polarity from this interaction. Let's re-examine the metaphor and multiply it into the longest poker game you can imagine, a lifetime. The cards are love, dislike, limitation, unhappiness, pleasure, etc. They are dealt and redealt continuously. You may during this incarnation begin, and we stress begin, to know your own cards. You may begin to find the love within you. You may begin to balance your pleasure, your limitations, etc. However, your only indication of other selves' cards is to look into the eyes. You cannot remember your hand, their hands, perhaps even the rules of this game. The game can be only won by those who lose their cards in the melting influence of love. It can only be won by those who lay their pleasures, their limitations, their all, upon the table face up, and say, inwardly, all of you players, each other self, whatever your hand, I love you. This is the game. To know, to accept, to forgive, to balance, and to open the self in love. This cannot be done without the forgetting, for we carry no weight in the life of the mind-body-spirit beingness totality. Incarnating in third density is a gamble, so to speak, that yields perfect and wholesome advantage for the wandering spirit, who may yet find its essence in love and light in this mundane world. Be that light, and let the light shine forth in the darkness. May the peace of our Father in heaven be upon you. Like and subscribe. Peace.